right, and let me share my screen. There we go. And I'll leave the chat open. If anybody wants to chat. All right, and okay. All right, let's see. Can everybody see my screen? I assume so. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Awesome. Thank you. Let's go to Canvas. Canvas. And let's bring up section 2. All right. So yeah. So last time we met with discussed the JavaScript assignment. The week before, the first 2 weeks, we worked mostly with static content, right? Just HTML, CSS, and now we're learning how we can make our applications dynamic, right? And we're making them dynamic on the client, on the browser. We can also make them dynamic on the server side. That's still valid. It's become less interesting, but it's still useful. You know, you can still do it using JavaScript, and I mean, not JavaScript. Well, yes, with Node.js, you can do it with JavaScript on the server side. Certainly, you can do it with PHP and Python and JSPs and ASPs, and there's tons of server-side techniques on creating dynamic HTML on the server. We're focusing mostly on the more modern techniques of generating content on the server side, on the client side, on the browser side. Okay, we introduced jQuery and JavaScript. These are gonna be very low-level techniques of dealing with the DOM directly. Right? DOM, the document object model, right? And whatever manipulations we do programmatically to the DOM, right, we are making it to the user interface. Okay. So last time we looked at this, we were playing around with being able to create a list of courses. Let's see where we left off. Let's run this and see how far we got. So this is up and running. Let's navigate to our localhost 8080. And let's take a look at that. Okay, so all right, I think this is where we left off last time. Yes. Let's see. I think do we do a create? Yeah. So we can create. We can create courses. Do we do a delete? I forget. Okay. I think yeah, we did delete as well, right? And we can create. All right. So let's move forward. Let's see how far we can take this. Let's review what we got. We had an HTML where we loaded some libraries, right? We loaded Bootstrap. We loaded Font Awesome. We loaded, I don't know that we need the CSS. And we put the code for jQuery and the course list down here, okay? All right, and the course lists, we in the HTML, we declared several things in here. We gave classes to the table, right? But that was mostly for styling purposes, so it looked pretty. We styled the forms with Bootstrap. We gave some classes to the buttons so that we can refer to them in JavaScript, not necessarily because we want to style them, but because we want to be able to refer to them from the JavaScript code by its class, right? And we also talked about a naming convention, right? That you should choose a good naming convention. I am proposing that we use WebDev, WBDV, those acronym as a means to identify any classes that we create, right? That are ours. But other ones that might be useful just as good is maybe your initial, or maybe the initials of some project or some organization that you belong to, like maybe NEU for Northeastern. We also had here some static content that we have since commented out. And then dynamically, we have this JavaScript that we wrote that it's including some sample code that we're playing around with to play around with the header just to demonstrate the use of jQuery. So that's just some toy examples that we can comment out. We also grabbed a couple of elements that are in the DOM, and that jQuery can refer to them by their CSS selector, right? Either by ID with the hash or dot for the class. And then once you have a reference to that DOM object here as a variable, you can then manipulate it. You can delete it. You can change its color. You can do all sorts of things. You can append content to it. We are representing our courses in an array with sections and seats and semesters and whatnot. We have a render courses that can iterate over an array of courses that we can pass it, right? It empties it out and then iterates appending or prepending the courses to the table rows, right? We also attached an event handler, a delete event handler that can grab the ID of we encoded the ID in the button, right? So that when you clicked on it, right, we can then retrieve the ID and know which one to remove. And we can splice it out from the array and then re-render, right? This ID is really the index of the element in the array, not really the ID, but we encoded it in the ID. That's what we called it ID over here. This is a default, render all the courses that you have so far. We also bound a create button, right? And that builds these new courses. Okay, so let's continue. Any questions from where we left off last time? All right, so let's continue. So what about being able to connect to the server, right? We need to be able to do this exactly what we did, but we need to be able to connect it to the server. Right? All this data right now is hard-coded. If I refresh, and I add, right, then I refresh, notice that it's not permanent, right? If I delete and I refresh, it's not permanent. Right now, all that data is being hard-coded here in the courses array. So we want to improve this. Instead, use the server, right, to store any of this data. But before we do that, let's clean up the code. It's a little of a mess. Okay, let's clean it up a little bit. Let's see. We got these table rows, right? We got these functions. We got some data over here. We got the render of the courses. We got this event handler, right? So here we're grabbing the create button here. We're grabbing the table rows here, right? So one of the things that I want to clean up is I want to show you something. Notice that we have the course list and jQuery listed down here, which is perfectly fine, right? Especially for improving performance, improving the download times from the internet, from the web, right? So it's perfectly reasonable to leave it here. But I want to show you something, right? If I move this and I put it where it's supposed to go, right, in the head, this is the syntactically correct place to put it. Right? This is where it really should live under proper HTML syntax. The reason we have put it down there is to for a really complex page, right? And it took a millisecond to render. It might be too long. People might not want to wait for a millisecond, right? It might leave our website, right? But I'm not going to get into those kinds of issues. If you leave it up here, you're talking about a millisecond or so. So anyway, so I put it in the right place, and so now if I refresh my screen, notice that it's broken. Okay, it's not doing what it's supposed to do, and the reason it's not doing what it's supposed to do is that when JavaScript gets loaded, right, when the document is being read, right, the browser looks at all these and goes to fulfill all these requests. Notice what's happening, right? If you look at the network, traffic, right? So if I inspect and here there's a tab called network. See this, right? If I refresh, notice what's happening. So first, the HTML is fetched from the server, right? This is the URL that the browser generates. It's a GET, and it fetches the HTML from the server. The server is running locally in my machine on localhost 8080. There it is. See that? So that's the first things that it downloads. So what's the first thing that it finds? So as the browser starts to parse this, it sees that there are 5 files that this document depends on, right? It depends on Bootstrap, depends on Font Awesome, on a CSS file that's locally in our machine, on jQuery, and on code. So it has to go and fetch all these things, right? Some things are going to go out to the Font Awesome server. Some of them is going to go out to the Bootstrap server. Some of them is going to go out to the jQuery server. So these things these documents are sparse. You know, there's all the way, you know, anywhere out there on the network, and it has to go and fetch them. And the way the browser does that is that it spawns off a whole bunch of threads that simultaneously start downloading all these things, and then you know, once it copies it locally on the machine where the browser is, it starts to build the DOM, starts to build the page. Okay, well, and there it is, right? So as it's parsing, it says, ooh, the browser is going to go fetch each one of these documents. See that? It's fetching all these documents. Font Awesome, Bootstrap, jQuery, my local CSS file, and the local JavaScript. Once it has it locally in the machine, then it starts rendering the DOM. Well, there's a few things that it does with the JavaScript. When it fetches the JavaScript, here's the document that it downloaded, right? It's our JavaScript file. It immediately executes that file. Right? It doesn't wait to continue parsing the document. It doesn't wait till it's to continue. The problem here is that the JavaScript here is referencing things that have not yet been loaded, right? It's referencing this table row over here. It hasn't yet loaded. It's referencing this create button, hasn't yet been loaded, right? So if you look at the console, right, it didn't spit out any errors, right? But it silently saw that it could not find any of these elements. Okay, so how do we fix this? So we need to tell jQuery that it should wait before it goes out and fetches this table rows, before it goes out and fetches this button. Okay, it should wait. Okay, wait until the document is fully loaded, until the DOM has been generated from the HTML. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, the way we do that in jQuery is as follows. jQuery, $, right? $. You can give it a function to that it will invoke once. We can configure jQuery to wait until the document has been loaded, and then once it's been loaded, it will notify you by calling a function and say, hey, the document is ready. How about now? Should we go fetch everything now? Should we bind everything to the DOM? So we're going to do just that. We're going to create a function. We're going to call it main. The name doesn't really matter. It could be int, main, ABC, XYZ. It doesn't matter, right? I like to use either main or int, or I'm sorry, init. Right? Init or main, either one is fine. Okay. And so we can then configure jQuery, right, to call main when the document has been loaded, the DOM is ready, and now it can be manipulated. All right. So here, when we call main here, we can be guaranteed that everything has been loaded, and now we can start manipulating the document. So let's do that. So let's move all these variables, right? All these variables. There it is, right? Let's move at the top of the document. And let's not fetch them right away, because remember, this is executing right away, and if I execute it, it's not going to find this. So instead, I'm going to just declare the variable, but I'm not going to bind it. Okay. Instead, I'm going to do that in main. In main is where I'm going to fetch from the DOM and bind it to a local variable. Make sense? Same thing with this create button. Okay, I'm going to move it to the top. There it is. And I'm not going to bind it. I'm going to do that in main. Because when I hit main, I am guaranteed, right, that this will find something before it was not guaranteed. Make sense? All right. What else?
May I ask a quick question?
Yes.
It's sort of unrelated, but since you're talking about declarations, what is the difference between declaring with var and with let? And
yeah, we're going to introduce. Yeah, no, we're going to be using let and const when we hit ES6 next week. I'm still, this is an older style JavaScript that I want you to be familiar with it. Not that you're going to use it a lot, but you're going to see a lot of it out there. And I want you to use the old style. This is ES5. Next week, we're going to start using ES classes, introduces import, introduces all sorts of export, defaults, introduces a lot of stuff that we're not going to look at this week. We're going to start looking at it next week. Okay. All right. Okay. So this create button also, right? Notice that it's being bound here, right? So we're going to have to move this as well into the main function. I'm going to move that, and I'm going to move it right there. Okay. Once it's bound, now I can call this, right? Okay, what else? Render courses, yeah, so that's good. The courses, all right, that's about it. That's about it, right? And we can clean this up. We can remove this. All right. Okay, let's see if this works now. Oops, still not. Empty. Empty. I think this is table rows. Table rows. jQuery table rows. We get an error on line 13. Let's see, line 13, table rows. So render courses. So render courses is being called way too soon. Okay, so let's do that in main. Let's do that only in main when we're guaranteed that everything has been set up. Let's do that. Okay, there we go. We're back in business, right? We can create, right? And we can delete. Okay. Couple more things to clean up. Let's see. It's good practice that these variables, okay, the name of these variables are just fine, all right? But we're going to improve just a little bit, and we're going to rename them because we know that these are not regular variables. Well, I mean, they are just variables, right? But they're bound not to literal strings or integers or dates. Instead, we know that they're bound to DOM elements that we retrieve using jQuery, right? So let's rename them to just to remind us that these are, they're special variables, right? So we're going to put a $sign in front of them. It doesn't change the behavior. It doesn't change anything. It's just that, it's going to remind us, right, that this is a variable that is bound to something in the DOM, and it has all sorts of really cool functions that we can call on it, right, to empty it, to change the HTML content, to append, to do all sorts of things, right? So let's change that. Let's refactor that. And yep. So it's been renamed everywhere. And here as well, let's rename the create button as well. So I'm just going to rename create. We'll put a $sign in front of it. I'm going to say, yep. Let's see. Let's refresh. Okay, I'm not going to rename courses because courses is not bound to the DOM, right? It's just an array of objects. Okay. All right. What else? I think we're pretty good. Let's continue. So we want to connect this to the data, to a server, right, that has actual data, and the server can be found, right, as the assignment tells you, right? Assignment number 2 tells you that the server can be found at this URL. If you scroll all the way down, the server is available. Let's see. Right here, this URL. So let's copy that and paste it here. Okay, right now there are no users, right? Because you're going to be creating your own users. But I'm going to use my NUID, and you're supposed to use your NUID, right? And this is the server. The server is running here at this domain, web dev generic server heroku.com, right? Followed by API, and then you're going to be putting your NUID. Don't use mine, right? And so that each one of you will have different set of data, right? Someone's going to have their own users, and someone's going to have some other users. I'm going to use Jan Nunzi. That's my username. Don't use mine. You use yours. It doesn't have to be your NUID. It can be any string that you know is unique to you. It could be your phone number. You can be your zip code. Well, no, maybe too many people are in the same zip code. It could be your social security number. Actually, no, don't use your social security number. That'd be a security risk. So anything that you know it's unique to you. And I'm gonna have courses, right? I'm gonna be, instead of working with users, I'm working with courses, right? So over here, and this could be anything that is useful to you, right? You could have movies or teams or scores or games or whatever, right? So courses, I already have some data that I added earlier today, right? I have a few courses that I put in there so that we can use to play around, right? And they have titles, right? Seats and semester and blah, 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 okay? So yeah, we have some data. So how do we can totally go and retrieve it at this URL. How do we do that programmatically, right? We want to do that from jQuery, from JavaScript. So how do we do that? So the assignment walks you through that. It says that you can get data using this URL, right? Where it's the URL / API, your NUID, and then / whatever you want. You can send data if you post. You can get data using .get. You can update data with put, or you can remove data using delete. Okay, and you should implement all this inside of a function in a function that we're going to be calling a service. In your case, it's going to be a user service. In my case, it's going to be a course service, right? So let's create a file. I'm going to create a file here that is going to be responsible for communicating with the server, retrieving all the data from the server, right? And we're going to put all that inside of a service directory. This service directory is going to host all our services that are going to be talking to the server, okay? So we're going to create one that can talk courses. So course.service.client.js. Okay, so in here, we're going to copy this code. I'm going to paste that in there. There we go. Okay. All right, so let's see. This is a regular JavaScript function, right? I'm going to rename it. So this says this is a course service client. Also, I'm going to rename the fact that this is not a user. We're not working with users. We're working with course, right? So replace match case and replace all. And course, let's see, create course, find all courses, find course by ID. Yep, delete course up. Perfect. Courses. Okay. And my API is going to be Januzzi, right? So this URL is the same URL that I have here, the same URL. And I want to programmatically do this, not manually. I just did it manually. I know I can get data manually. I want to do it programmatically. What else? Let's say create course. This is course, right? So I'm going to rename this too. So this is course, replace all, match case. So create course, and it takes a course object, like a course ID. If I want to retrieve a particular course, I can update a course, I can delete a course. So all the CRUD operations, right, that I can do with all these folks, right? And we're going to implement this content here. We're going to implement this right here. Okay, we're going to implement all this. So I'm going to do it for courses, and hopefully this will be an example of how you would go about doing it for users. Yes. So let's do the first one. Let's go fetch all these courses. Let's go fetch all these courses, and we're going to implement it here in course service client. All right. So how are we going to do this? How do we do this? Well, first of all, let's look at this function, right? So this function looks like a regular function. You know, it looks just like any other function that we have here. So here's a function, right? Here's another function. Looks like any other function. But this function is not going to be invoked like this, right? Like we call a function just like that. Instead, this function, we're going to call new on this function. And so what JavaScript does is that it is going to treat this function as if it were a constructor. Okay, so it's going to create an instance of course service client. Okay, now again, this is the old style, you know, ECMA 5 that's still widely used, and it has been replaced in ECMA 6, has been replaced by an actual keyword called class, right? And that's what we're going to be looking at it next week and for the remainder of the semester. Okay, but for now, I want you to learn about this this older style, because it's still widely used out there in the wild, right? You're gonna certainly you're gonna have to deal with it. Okay, so yeah, so this is the old style of creating classes, and then once you create this class, you can use the keyword this to refer to the current instance, right? Very much like you can in other languages, like in Java or C#. This is a keyword that references the current instance. And what we're doing here is that we're binding to the instance, we're binding all these functions down here. See that? We're saying this dot create course is equal to create course, which is down here. Find all courses, okay? And what this is going to allow us to do is that we're going to be able to call these functions with the instance when we instantiate it, okay? So let's try find all courses. So here we're just going to say maybe, you know, alert, you know, find all courses. All right, so let's see how we would use it. But first of all, we're going to need to load this in the HTML. Okay, if we haven't done that already, we haven't. Okay, so I think this is where we want to do it. So this is course.service.client. Okay, all right, so it's been loaded. Now the course list should be able to call it, invoke it. Right, so let's see how we would do it. Let's go back to the JavaScript, and the way we're going to do it is that we're going to say var the course service is going to be equal to new course service. There it is, right? So now we have an instance, and for instance, we can call functions such as course service find all courses. Let's see if that works, right? So let's go back here and let's run this again, and something went wrong. Let's see, line 3. It didn't like our course service. What don't you like? Console, blah, blah, blah. Oh, looks like it cannot load our course service. Can't find it. Did I misspell it? Services, meaning, let's see. This is the course list, HTML. It's going to go up 1. Then down to service. Oh, services. This should be plural. Services. There we go. Let's try it again. Let's continue. There we go. Find all courses. Yes. So we're calling that function. We're definitely calling. All right. Okay. So we're here, right? We're able to call this function. Where do we want to do that? We don't want to do it here, right? We want to do it in main, right? In main, we want to do something like find all courses. We assign to the local variable courses, right? And then we want to call render courses. Yes, you know, go fetch all the courses from the server and then render them. All right, that's what we want to do. Okay, so how do we do that? How do we programmatically go and fetch all this, right? Well, there's a function called fetch, and it does exactly what you think it does. right? It goes and fetches data from the web. You just have to give it a URL of where to go fetch that data, okay? And the data is available here in this URL. Now, the problem with this URL is that the keyword this here, the keyword this behaves slightly different than what you would expect in other languages, right? Usually in other languages, the keyword this is always bound to the outer instance, right? In JavaScript is bound to the closest scope boundary, right? So when this is first instantiated, it is true. The keyword this is indeed bound to the closest to the instance that we're instantiating. But in here, this is not bound to the outer instance. It's instead bound to the nearest context, which is this function here, right? This is referencing an instance of this function, right? So it doesn't behave exactly how we thought it would. So that's why we have this variable self, which is keeping track of the value of the original this, right? So if we want to retrieve any function or any other variable that is bound to the instance, we're going to do it this way. We're going to say self dot URL. There we go. Okay. So it fetches the data. It fetches the data, and we are going to return. We're going to return whatever the fetch returns. Okay. So let's run this.
I think you have it in the wrong function.
I'm in the wrong phone. Oh, sorry. I was just testing you. There we go. Thank you. There it is. So let's refresh this and let's look at the console. And something went wrong. What's going on here? And so what probably happened? Let's see the network. In the network, okay, it looks like, notice we have a new query, a new URL, a new request that is going out to our URL. See that? And the response from the server looks okay. It looks like there's data there. See that? If we look at the preview, there's our 3 courses, the data that is here. So it is fetching the data. So what's going on? Let's take a look at let's put a breakpoint. And let's look at the source code. Let's look at course list. Let's look at what comes back over here. Let's put a breakpoint right there and see this courses, right? Because that's what we're returning from the function. We refresh and we hover over courses. It's not the array we were expecting. Instead, it's this weird promise. See that promise? So it's not quite what we'd expect, right? So let's talk about promises. Okay, so remember in the network here that the browser is going to fetch all these things out from the network, okay, including these courses out from the network. Okay, now the way it fetches all these documents, it does it simultaneously, right? It starts a whole bunch of threads, and each one is independently fetching things from the server. Okay, so it's doing this asynchronously. It's not like it's downloading the CSS, it's waiting for the CSS to be done, right, before going on to the font awesome, and then waiting for font awesome to be done, right, and then going on to course list and waits. Okay, it doesn't do that. Instead, it does it asynchronously, right? It spawns off a thread. Go ahead, go fetch that, and then you go fetch that, and you go fetch that, right? So all these things are happening simultaneously. Okay, and so the browser is not blocking, waiting for these to happen. And so same thing with courses. Courses is not happening synchronously like we think, right? This way of thinking, where the way we were taught to program is that course service makes a call to find all courses, and then we wait for this to be done, right? We wait for this to come back. And then once we have the data, we then can continue. Not what's happening here, right? What fetch is not behaving this way. Fetch is not going out to this request, waiting for the courses to come back, and now that I have it, I can then give you the array of courses. Okay, that's not what's happening. That's not the way it happens. Instead, it returns to us an object that allows us to participate in this multi-threaded environment where a lot of things might be happening at the same time, right? Things are being fetched from the network, right? And they need to be, reconstituted bit by bit. And some of these stuff might be streams that are streaming all at their own speed, right? So how do we participate in this world? We participate using promises, right? Promises is going to allow us to participate in this multi-threaded asynchronous world. So how do we do that? Okay, right. So first of all, what this returns is a promise. A promise is just like it sounds, right? It says, hey, I don't have what you're asking for right now, but I promise that, in a few milliseconds, right, I'll have the answer that you like, right? So don't wait for me. Don't wait for me. Go do your thing, right? Go do something else. Leave me your phone number so I can call you back, right? Whenever I'm done. When I'm done, I'll call you back so you can come back and work, and keep working what you were looking for, right? Right? So I'm going to call you back. So then you can keep working on what you wanted, right? So the way we leave a callback phone number for this to the promise, because this returns a promise, the way we leave a phone number, like a callback phone number, for it to call us back, is that this is going to return a function then. And this function is where we're going to leave our phone number. We're going to leave a function that fetch will call that function. We'll call it back whenever the response came back from the server. Okay, so we're going to put a function here. And so the promise, what happens is that when we call this fetch, we get the promise, right? We register with the function, right? And then we can go out and do something else. Now, we're not going to wait, right? So this is so independently, a thread gets spawned, right? It starts talking to the server while we're doing other things, right? We're doing animation, we're doing whatever, blah blah blah. We're playing, we're playing some cat videos or whatever, right? While this fetch is talking to the server, is streaming the response, and then when it comes back, it will pass us. Then here will pass us. We'll call this function. It will pass you the response. We'll pass you the response that it got back from the server. Everybody okay? They're still good. All right. So now that we got the response, we can return the response. Let's return the response. So fetch fetches it, right? And then, so this response is what fetch returns, and then fetch returns what? The response. Okay, so let's try it again. Let's reply, right? Let's look at the courses. This is still not what we wanted. Okay. Wait, did we refresh this? Okay. Let's print it out. Let's print out the response before returning the response. Let's do console log response. So let's look at the console of what the response is coming back, and continue. Okay, see what we're getting back from the server. See this response, it's a response object. The server is saying, hey, back the response status is 200, everything's a-okay. Maybe some headers, maybe some cookies or whatnot, right? And look at this body here. See this body? That's where our data is. See that body? That's where the data is, right? So our data is embedded there. We need to extract it from that body, right? The way that HTTP works is that the browser sends HTTP requests and the server responds with HTTP responses, right? In both places, when requests and responses are going back and forth, right, they are formatted this way, right? They have a body section they have a headers section, right? And then there's status code and blah 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 blah. Okay, so in both ways, going when the client sends the HTTP request, it has a body, it has headers, it has all this stuff, right? And when it comes back, it also has body and headers. So the data is embedded in this body. So how do we retrieve it from the body? So the body is, so this body is, we know that body that is coming back, we know it's formatted like this. We know it's an array that has a whole bunch of, strings, right? Raw, this is the raw content that's coming back. We know that's it. And that's inside of that body. Now, that body, the way we consume that body, right? It's a stream, just like you're reading from a file system. It's a stream that you have to build it bit by bit, right? Because this body could be representing any type of data, right? It could be a Word document, right? It could be a PDF document. It could be an image. It could be a song that is being streamed. It could be a movie, right? That is being streamed bit by bit, and we need to reconstruct it. Okay. So not only the response, we need to consume it asynchronously. The body also needs to be consumed asynchronously, right? It needs to be built bit by bit. Okay, so how do we do that? Look, it sounds complicated, right? It sounds complicated. So the way we're going to consume it is as follows. We're going to get the response, right? And we're going to do .json. Okay, .json is going to be responsible for parsing out bit by bit, right? And rebuilding the string into what we're expecting, right? Where this function already does all that, right? It rebuilds this into a string. It knows that it's expecting the JSON format, right? And it rebuilds the JSON object. Okay, all right. But it too returns a promise. It returns a promise again, right? So here, over here, we don't really get the course, not yet anyway. We get a promise saying, hey, I am parsing this into JSON. Wait, okay? I'll let you know when I'm done building this bit by bit. And when I'm done, right, I will give you the actual data. Right? I will give you whatever's actually in there. What's in there? Presumably the actual courses are in there, right? I'm going to call you in a function and let you know when you get the actual courses. And then finally, you'll be able to say courses is equal to the actual courses from the server, and you'll be able to run renders. You can render the courses. Okay. All right. Let's see if that is indeed true. Let's refresh. Let's see the actual courses. There they are. There's our courses, 4 courses, and we can render them. There they are. See that? These are the courses that were in the database, in the server, these same ones. Of course, and looks like somebody has been posting data. Somebody playing around and posting data already? Okay, there it is. So there we have it. We have data that is coming from the server. Notice a mistake that we could have done here. We could have careful and don't do this, right? Here's courses. Courses has the data. Careful not to leave this render courses out here, right? Careful, right? If we wait a minute, I think where is it? Right, you might run into a race condition, right, where sometimes this will work, sometimes it won't work. Okay, and so this should live in here. We should live inside here. Okay. Now this is guaranteed to render the courses when the courses you have it, and then you can run it. Okay. All right. Any questions? This makes sense?
What happens if you want? Oh, go ahead.
No, I just posted a question on the chat.
Oh. service, blah, 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 blah. Yep. A response.json, since the content is JSON, what if the content was any other type? Yeah, then you would be text. If it's text, then you would call it text. Exactly. Yeah, you would say text right here. Yep.
Professor?
Yes.
Hi. So first off, wait. I thought there was 2 calls. Don't you need a semicolon if you have 2 calls? And then.
Sorry.
Oh, I thought you were making 2 calls in the body of the then. So I was gonna say you need a semicolon, but more interesting question is for fetch. Do we need to pass a header? I was like playing with it, and I read on Geeks for Geeks who was saying to make sure that like you put a header and you say that like.
Yeah, we
know,
will
like,
do a headers in a minute, but not for not for get.
Okay, yeah, not forget. Okay, makes sense.
Yeah, right now we're doing only get, but when we do post, put, and delete, we'll need to add additional things. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. All right, awesome. Yeah, so there we go. So we got a couple of courses there, and but notice that if I create more, right, and I refresh, notice that they're gone, right? They're gone, right? And they're not they don't stay permanent, right? So we want to be able to make them permanent. So how do we do that? Even if I delete, right? If I delete these and then I refresh, notice that they're not being permanent on the server. So how do we make them permanent? So let's do an easy one first. Let's do delete. We want to be able to delete courses, okay? So to delete courses, let's see what we got to, how do we delete now? So in course, we delete by doing right here, right? NU delete, this button right here, right? And we're clicking and we're finding the ID and we are retrieving it here and we're splicing it out. And this is fine, right? To when we are updating the local array of courses, but we need to remove it from the remote array of courses in the remote server. So how do we do that? So we're gonna use the service, right? We're gonna use the service. And the service is gonna do what? We're gonna call delete course. So course service. We're gonna call the delete course, and what we want to be able to do is locally here we have an array, right? So this ID, really this ID is an index, not really an ID, right? This is not the real ID of the course, right? Notice that the objects that are coming in the network, right? They actually do have IDs. See that? Has an underscore ID, right? That should give you a clue that this is being stored in a Mongo database. Okay, so whereas this ID that we have here, that we're storing it, we're actually putting just the index of the for loop right here, right? So this is not really an ID. So I'm going to just rename this what it is. So this is an index. So this is index. Okay, so that's what we're splicing out, the index. But and that works in a local array, but remotely there are no arrays, right? We have to do it by ID, right? So we need the actual ID of the object, okay? And so we can know the ID of the object by the courses array now contains all the courses from the remote server, right? So if we retrieve that course by its index, there's going to be a property called ID there, right? And so now we have the actual ID, and then we can pass it to the delete course. We can pass it to the delete course, and the delete course. The way we're going to delete the course is that we're going to do more or less the same thing of this fetch. Okay, we're going to do this fetch again. We're going to do return fetch. Okay, and we're going to append according to the assignments, right? We're going to use this right here. This delete is basically the URL appending the ID at the end. See that? And so to append it, we can do something like this. We can grab the self.url, right? And we're going to append / course ID. See that? Like that. right? Now, a more prettier syntax is that instead of using this concatenation and these strings, what we're going to do is that we're going to put everything inside backticks, okay? And these are going to be now expressions. These are going to be variable expressions. These are going to be variable expressions that are going to allow us to concatenate easier these strings, right? So that we don't have to deal with pluses, right, or double quotes or anything like that, right? So this is a more modern way of working with strings than instead of using lots of concatenations. We used that technique earlier, right, this week, to work with this long string, right, and be able to embed variables, okay? Right, so we're fetching that with the ID at the end, but this generates a get by default, right? Just like this one, by default, it generates a get, an HTTP get. We want a delete. So we can give it here an optional configuration object where you can specify the method that you want. And we don't want the default method. We want the method to be the delete method. Okay? We still don't need the header because we're not passing any data around. Okay, so that's going to return a response. Okay, here's a response, which we don't really care about the response too much here. We're going to also return the response.json, and there's no data. It's really what comes back is some status information, whether it was successful, how many records were removed, and so on and so forth, right? So here in our course list, right, where we do the delete, where do we do the delete? Where's delete? Delete. Oh, here's delete, right? The delete here, here's delete, is going to get another promise, and it's going to get status. Going to get status, which we're basically we're going to ignore. By now, we are guaranteed that the server has removed that object from the database, right? So we can now make sure that it's synchronized with locally in our user interface, right? So we know the server is updated now. We can now update our user interface, right? We're going to splice it out from our courses array, and we're going to re-render the array. Okay, so let's see if that works. Let's refresh, and let's remove maybe this one over here, delete. Okay, notice that we went out to a server. There it is. See that? We went out to the server. We went out to the server. Notice that there are actually two queries that went out, right? There's the ID of the course that we were removing, right? One is an options call. The other one is the actual delete. See that? One of them, the first one, it's actually listed backwards, but the options was sent earlier. It's a browser asking for permission from the server, asking if it's allowed to delete. It's asking the server, hey server, what are my options? Okay, and the server responds in the headers. It responds that these are your options. These are the allowed methods: get, post, put, delete options, right? And delete is the one that it's looking for. If delete is allowed, then it makes the second query, right? And says, oh, here it is. Here's the delete, and then it responds. It responds with some status information saying, yep, I was able to delete one, right? Everything's okay. The number of items that were affected, status, meta status information. That's what I programmed my browser to do. Your browser can do something else. Okay, so let's see if that was permanent. Let's refresh. Notice that indeed the record, the row that we deleted is gone forever. It's gone. So I can delete another one and refresh. Okay. All right. So there we go. So we can retrieve. We can delete. How about create? Let's do a create. All right, let's make that permanent. Let's do that now. All right. So before we do that, let's clean this up a little bit. So instead of this being embedded in here, let's move this into an actual function. So let's remove this. Let's remove this, and we're going to put it inside a delete course. Okay, and so we're going to put the function somewhere here. The function delete course. That. I guess we don't need that. We have one parenthesis too many. And the event is going to be passed in right here. Okay, notice the syntax, right? This click, we're passing a reference to the function. Okay, functions in JavaScript are treated like any other variable. You can pass variables, functions around like variables. So careful not to put a parenthesis here. Right? If you put a parenthesis here, delete function will be invoked once, and then whatever the delete function comes back with, that's what click is going to try and bind to. But delete course is not returning a function, right? Actually, it's not returning anything. So then this click won't work, right? Because it's not binding to anything, to a function. Instead, this should be just a function all by itself. All right, excellent. Let's see if this still works. Let's delete one more. Refresh. Excellent, that works. Excellent. All right, let's keep going. All right, so let's implement create. Okay, so create for us is this one right here, create. Okay, so let's
Professor, can you
yes.
go over why we split the function like that?
Why we split it like that? What do you mean?
Why did you take the delete function from the body? What was the purpose of that?
Well, it's you know, first one is cleaner, right? It's easier to work with this function all by itself. I can test it independently as opposed to when it's embedded in here, I can't access it. Right, so you know, I can debug it, I can reuse it, I can call it from other places, right? So it's reusable. You know, if it's embedded in here, right, it's anonymous, no one else can access it. It'll only be accessed over here. So it's also, you know, unless this is something that no one is ever going to use, then I would leave it here. Okay, but if it's something that can be invoked or reused or tested, then definitely I would create a function for it. Okay. Let's do the same thing for this, the create. This create here, this is a function. Let's move this function out of here, right? And let's declare here a function called create course. Okay? And create course, again, it's a function that's going to live out here. And it's going to call create course. And what's it going to do? It's going to grab this object, right, and then it's going to push it into the array, and then it's going to render it. Okay, so let's work on that, right? Let's implement course, create course in the client, right? What we want to be able to do is call create course, pass an object, and send it out to the server. Something like this. We have new course. I want to be able to call the course service, and I want to call create course, and I want to call it with new course. Okay, and so what's new create course going to do with it? We're going to do something similar that we've done, like this find all and this delete. Right? We're going to do the same thing. We're going to do return fetch. Okay, we're going to go into the URL. Oops. Self URL. Okay. Get delete is going to be a post, right? According to the assignment, right? We create new data. We create new data by posting to the URL, right? And putting the data in the body. Okay. So how do we do that? Well, it's going to be a post. So method is going to be a post. And we need to pass the data, right? We need to pass the data. So let's put this in so it's easier to read. We'll put it in different separate lines. Okay, so in the body, we need to put the course. Okay, we need to put the course. But we can't just put the course, because the course here is represented in binary format, right? In the RAM, in the memory of the CPU. It needs to be converted into a format that can be streamed across the wire, right? Across the HTTP requests. So we need to convert this into a string that can be streamed, bits by bits. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to use a library called the JSON library, which is always available to all browsers, okay, that can stringify, can convert a binary representation of the course into a string, right? So there's our course. Now it can be embedded inside of the body. So this is kind of the inverse of this response.json, right? It's converting into something that can be streamed over the wire. And we need to tell the server, how to, when we send this data to you, they need to be told how to interpret the data, right? They need to be told, well, what is this? Is this an image that you're uploading? What is it? Is it a PDF document that you're uploading? What are you sending me, right? So the way we do that is through the headers. In the headers, we can say that the content that we're sending you, the type of the content that we're sending you is JSON. You should interpret it as a JSON object, not as an image, not as a PDF document, right? And the way we say that is by doing content type, okay, and the standard MIME type is application/JSON. Right, this is an industry standard. Right, we're saying that this document is of this type. Okay. All right. So this is going to go and start a thread that's going to start talking to the data to the server. It's going to start streaming this to the server, and the server at some point is going to receive this. It's going to rebuild the JSON object on the other side. It's going to store it in the database, right? And then it's going to respond to me. It's going to send me as a response the actual document that was saved in the database, okay? Which is now it's going to have a unique identifier ID that I did not have here. It's going to have the timestamp. It's going to have a whole bunch of stuff, some metadata in there. It's going to send it back to me in the response. So I can wait for the response, right? It'll send me back the response at some point, which we're going to parse out in as JSON. I'm going to parse it out as JSON. Okay. So the create course here, this create course is going to receive we're guaranteed that this was successful. We were able to store this in the database, and we can now safely push it into our local array as a copy of that remote server, a remote course. We can push the actual course, right? And then we can render the course. Okay. All right. So let's check it out. Let's see if this blows up. Let's refresh. Let's create a course. So create. Notice that for each one, right? Notice that for each time that we're calling this, we get two. First, an options request saying, hey, is it okay that I send you a post? And the server says, yep, you can send me gets, posts, deletes, options, and then it sends a post. But they all look the same, right? There's an options and a post, an options and a post. See that? We call this option, sometimes we call it like a pre-flight, right? It's a pre-request saying, is it okay to send you the request, right? And then I send you the actual request. All right, so if we refresh, notice that the data is permanently stored in there successfully. See that, right? Now, unfortunately, the data is being stored as always the same information. See that? It's always the same information. Ideally, we would want to use the data that is in here, the seats, the semester, and all that stuff, right? Instead of using this hard-coded content. So let's fix that. So the way we're going to fix that, right, that in the course list, right, we need to be able to grab these elements, right? These input fields, this drop down, we need to be able to grab that and then read the value. How do we do that? Well, in the HTML, right, we have these forms. They're the input fields. Let's give them names. Let's give them classes so that we can, refer to them, right, from the JavaScript. Let's do that. So let's give this name web. Remember, good naming practices, right? Prepend it with something that is about the project or the organization or the team, right? So I'm going to say I'm going to use web dev. This is the title field, so it's a field. What else? The second one is what? Is section. So it's web dev section field. So we want to read from that. And this one is what? This one is the seats. This is web dev dash, what is it? Seats. So seats dash field. And this one is going to be web dev. Notice that we're not adding this because we're going to style it and make it look prettier. Instead, we're using it so that we can retrieve it from JavaScript. So this is semester.field. Okay. All right. Excellent. Now in the course list, we're going to declare variables so that we can bind to them. Right. We're going to say var, right, and this will be what is it? The title field, right? The what is it? The section field and the seats field and the semester field. Okay, and we're going to bind them in the main function, right? We're going to grab them all. We're going to say the title field is going to be $, right, dot web dev title field, right? And the semester or the seats, okay, we're going to grab the web dev seats field, right? And the semester field, we're going to grab the web dev semester field. There we go, right? Once we have it, we can then use those when we create a new object, when we create a new course. Instead of hard coding these, we can use those to read the values of each one of them, right? So we can use the title field to read the value of those input fields, right? So that these are not hard coded anymore, right? So this is section field, that value. This is a seats field, we got the value, right? And the semester field, get the value. Okay. All right, so let's try it out, see if this blows up. Okay, let's refresh. And let's see, this is CS5550, section 02, seats 90, and spring. Create. And something went wrong. Let's see, what didn't it like? Type error, blah, 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 value of undefined, line 34. Section field. Oh, I think we never declare section field, right? We never declare section field. Right, we never did section field. So this is section field. Section. Did we not declare it? There we go. Yeah, we did. Right, and this is section, right? Section. Perfect. Let's refresh. Let's try it again. So this would be CS 4550, section 02, 90, and sprint. Did we not? Let's see, is there an error in the console? No. Oh, there we go. What's going on? Wait, it seemed like it wasn't working. Let's delete that. Let's try that again. Let's remove a whole bunch of these. Let's see. So this is web dev. Create. Oh, it is working. Yeah, I don't know what's going on. I don't know why it was. Maybe the server got skipped the beat or something. Anyway, we can create a whole bunch of these, and we can refresh and notice that the data is indeed stored there permanently. Make sense? Everybody good?
Is that that val function a function given because those are input fields, or do we need to set that up somehow?
Yeah, no, all those functions are added by jQuery, right? When you bind these and you create, right, and when you bind something from a row or any DOM element, jQuery decorates those objects by adding a whole bunch of really cool functions. So including the val, which allows you to read whatever you have in those input fields. And they always come back as strings, right? So if you know you need integers or whatnot, you're going to have to parse it into the correct data type.
And does the functions that jQuery gives the element depend on the type of element? So like, does table have different functions than an input field?
No, it's always val.
Okay.
There's one, like for the checkbox, they have checked, right, to check to see if it's selected or not. But they also have a value. So they have a value because the checkbox can have a value, but you can also query it to see if it's checked or not. For the dropdown, you can also ask the index of the selected item, right? So yeah, so you have value and you have other ones, and you can look at the documentation for them. But the ones that we're going to mostly be using here is just val. All right, so yeah, so we can create new ones, we can delete, we can read all of them. How about select? Let's work on select and update, right? So what select is going to do, right, is that it's going to work just like delete. We're going to select, we're going to need to know which one you selected, right? And that's going to populate this form up here, right? And then once you populate it, we are going to be able to then update it and then update it back onto the server, right? So let's do that. So let's work on select. So select is gonna be very much like delete, right? So we're going to give this a class, and this is going to be webdev -select, right, button, and let's put here the ID. Now this ID, right, we can give it the index that we had earlier, or we can give it the actual ID, right? Because now we know that these courses have all this data plus some ID that came from the server, right? So let's give it the actual ID, right? And then we're going to bind, all those buttons, all these buttons. We're going to bind them so that if you click them, then you're going to call a function select course, right, which doesn't exist. So let's write that over here. It'll be function select course and the event, and we're going to do very much like we did with the delete function, right? We're going to do something like we're going to grab the event and the target, and we're going to retrieve the attribute, the ID attribute. Okay, and that's going to be the actual ID of the course. Let's see, let's do a console log, see if that worked. Okay, so let's refresh and let's do select. There it is, see the ID? So these are the IDs of each one of the courses, okay? Now that we have the ID, we want to copy the values of those courses, of that particular course that you just selected. We want to copy it into here. So how do we do that? Well, we need the actual, we don't need the ID, we actually need the actual course, right? The object, and we know it's in the array, right? So we can retrieve that object and say, well, what's the course with that ID? Well, we can iterate over the course, right? And find, so this is a new function, new functions that were added to JavaScript, which are pretty cool. Find iterates over an array, course says, iterates over an array, and it returns the item that meets the criteria that you provide here. Right? So as it's iterating, it'll pass you the course. Now I'm using ES6 syntax, right? So this is a new syntax that I'm going to introduce next week, right? This is a function right there. That's a function. Takes a parameter, right? And basically it's each course as it's iterating over the courses, and it's going to return, right? The one that returns true, that's the one that the course that I want, right? Which one I want? Well, the one where the course ID is equal to the ID that I just retrieved from the button. If it's equal, then that's the course that I want. I'm going to put it here. Yes? I might actually have a variable, global variable here. It's going to be called, selected course, right? Which at first it'll be null, right? And I can save that into a selected course. Okay. Okay, now I know the selected course. I can use the selected course to populate these fields. I can say, I can grab the title field, and just like I used val, I use val to read the value. I can also use val to set the value, right? I can, if I pass it data, right, I'm going to write to the input field, right? So I can grab the title, I can grab the seats, right? I'm going to set the selected course dot seats. Okay, and then you can grab the semester field, and I can set the value from the selected course dot semester. Okay, all right, let's see if this works. All right, so let's refresh. So if we click on this select, notice that indeed I'm copying the values here. So select, select, select. Notice that actually let's make them different so that we know that these are different, right? So this is CS5550, section, no section, seats 34, and this is fall or summer, create. And this is CS3200, then seats 45, create. And one more, CS whatever, section 12, seats 56, and this is fall. Create. Okay. All right. So let's go back and let's select this one. There we go. So it copies it over. Selects. Let's see, it copies it over. All right. So it's working. Perfect. All right. Now that we've copied the values in there, we want to update. We want to update. Maybe I want to change the section to be something else, or maybe somebody else wants to join and I want to increase it to 757, and then I want to update. Okay. So how do we update? So basically, we're going to have to read all these values back, right, and then send it over to the server to make it permanent and store it permanently in the server. So how do we do that? So we're going to bind to the update button. Let's go to the update button. Where is it? Here's the update button. Let's give it a class, right? So this is going to be something like webdev dash update button. Okay. And so here we're going to declare the button var update button, and we're going to bind it in our main. I'm going to say, grab it, the update button. I'm going to grab it from the DOM. That's the selector here. And we're going to bind it to a click. We're going to say, if you click the update button, then we're going to have an update function that's going to handle that we have to build. All right, so let's build that. Let's build it right here. Update course. What should it do? Well, it should grab the selected course and whatever you changed here, we need to copy it back into the selected course, and then send it over to the server for storage, right? So let's do that. We're going to say selected course. We're going to update the title if you changed it with the title field, the value. Let's rewrite it. We need the title. We need the semester. We need the seats, right? And so this is the semester field. This is the seats field. Now that we've updated it, right, we can send it over to the server using the course service, right? And with the update course, which is going to expect the ID plus the actual course, right? So we need to send the ID plus the actual course. All right. So let's implement the update course. Let's update it. Let's implement it down here. It's going to look very much like the post, right? So it's going to do return, right? We're going to have the URL, self URL. We're going to append the ID, the course ID, and we need to change the method to be put. We need to tell you we need to put the data of the new course in the body and stringify the course with the new data. And we need to tell the server to interpret this as JSON. So the content type should be considered application JSON. Okay. Now the server is going to find that object in the database, is going to make its updates, and then it's going to come back to us with some status information telling us whether we're successful or not. So we're going to wait for the response coming back. Here I'm using the new ES6 syntax, which is a little bit easier to read. We're going to do response.json, right? And notice it actually in the new syntax, you can this is much terser, much easier to read, right? Than this whole function here, right? That's much easier to read, and it's equivalent. And in the course list, once we have updated the course, right? We're going to have a response. We're going to have the status, and in the status we're going to ignore the status, and what we're going to do is that we need to re-update, right? We need to re-update that particular course in the array because we changed it. We need to change it in the array so that we can re-render it and make sure that it's synchronized with the server, right? So which one is it? We need to find the course that in the array, the index, right? We don't know which one. So we can find the index of the course that we want to update as follows. We can say var the index, look from the courses, find the index, right, whose course ID is equal to the selected course ID, right? Once you know the index, we can change the courses, the course at that particular index, and replace it with the values in the selected course, right? With the new values, and then we can re-render the whole thing, right? So render courses. Okay. All right, let's see if that works. Let's refresh. Okay, so for instance, CS5610, some new folks joined. So I'm going to change this to 95 and say update. And there it is. See that changed to 95. All right, so let's refresh. Yep, it changed permanently to 95. Okay. All right. Yeah, there you have it. So I'm going to share this source code with you so that you can take a look at this and play around with it. You know, you can use it as much as you want or not, right? And as a guide to work on users, right? So I'm going to git status. So we're going to git add, git commit, added course service. And I'm going to push this. All right, so this will be available for you so that you can clone it down and play around with it as much as you want. Okay? All right, any questions? All right, then. Thank you so much, everyone.
Can I ask something real quick? In this example, is the course ID is unique and it's being generated by the server, or where is that?
Yeah, the database is generating. Yeah, the database is generating these unique identifiers.
And I think there was a question in the chat as well.
Oh.
Thank you.
Chat. 2 questions. 1, when should we expect our grades for assignment 1? The TAs are actively working, hopefully within the next day or so. Will quiz 1 cover content on assignment 2? No, not the first quiz. The quiz is strictly HTML and CSS. I think Canvas says quiz 1 is HTML. Yeah, right. And Bootstrap, sorry, yes. Assignment 2 has no due date. Oh, right, so that's next Wednesday. I'll update it, but it is next Wednesday. Response JSON since the content JSON. Okay. Yep. Anything else? All right. Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thank you.